Many of you are familiar with us, but we are the Oklahoma Center for Community and Justice, our mission being to, in our generation, make Oklahoma a more just and hospitable state for everyone who has the opportunity and the pleasure to live here. And so definitely a part of that is engaging our law enforcement in the work that we do. And so it's very excited to be here today and to hear from the panelists that we have with us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Victoria to do some brief introductions and then share a little bit more logistical information with us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Denton Devon-Axton. I work here at OCCJ as the program coordinator, specifically working with the ILI program, the Inclusive Leadership Institute program, and the panelists, which we're doing today. So that's really exciting. Thank you all so much for joining. Just going over some Zoom functions in case folks don't know how to navigate that. We ask that during the panel that all participants stay on mute until the Q&A part comes out, and then we'll be having our lovely Miss Morgan here leading us through the Q&A section, and she'll give you instructions as we approach that. So just reminding all participants if they could please stay on mute during the first part of the discussion. And then would like to do brief introduction of the OCCJ staff. So starting with our programs director, obviously, Kara Golden, who you just met. And then Morgan Allen White, who is our director of development. And then Sarah Jane Del Monte, who's our director of engagement and who's based in Oklahoma City. And then Phil Armstrong, who's our president and CEO. And Shadi Nadir, who's our office administrator. I don't know if she is here yet. But all of our staff have the word OCCJ in front of their names. So if you need anything during the panel, please feel free to private message them, and they'll be happy to respond. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Kara for bios.
Wonderful, thank you. So as I mentioned, really excited to have with us Drew Diamond, and I'll start with you, the retired Tulsa Chief of Police. He completed 22 years of service with the Tulsa Police Department and served as chief from October 1987 until his retirement in November of 1991. Upon completion of his police service, he served for 16 years as the Director of Training and Technical Assistance for the Police Executive Research Forum. During his years as police executive, he became widely recognized as a leader in community policing and for his commitment to community service. He initiated progressive community-oriented reforms, including the development of innovative programs to improve the police response to persons with disabilities and victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, elder abuse, and hate crimes. And in 2001, he co-authored a book entitled Racially Biased Policing, A Principled Response. So thank you so much for being with us, Drew. And then we also have with us Dr. Tara Flagg-Lander, who currently serves as the Associate Vice President of Student Services at OSU Oklahoma City. Formerly, she served as an Assistant Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of Oklahoma, where she specialized in DEI and leadership equity. As an AVP, she engages with faculty, staff, and students to create a more inclusive environment while supporting students' academics and life goals. In addition to her university work, Dr. Lander is also the owner and principal consultant of TFL Consulting, wherein she specializes in DEI, inclusive leadership, and women in leadership. She received a Bachelor of Arts with a major in political science from the University of Central Oklahoma and a Master of Education with a focus on higher education administration from the University of Oklahoma as well. She earned a doctorate degree in educational leadership with an emphasis in higher education from Kansas State University. Additionally, she holds 2 graduate certificates in qualitative research methods and social justice education, also from Kansas State University. So thank you so much as well, Dr. Lander, for being with us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Victoria to get us started.
Thank you. Okay, starting with our first question, and all panelists, please just feel free to answer as you would. So do you see a disconnect between the police and social justice movements? In your opinion, why have we seen a rise in police shooting incidents rather than a fall in these numbers despite the social awareness and social heat the police forces are getting?
Okay, so I'll go ahead and start with that question. I think it's kind of it's an interesting dichotomy, right? So I think, of course, there's a rise, right? Numbers don't lie, but I also think that we have more access to information, right? And so when we receive what we're getting, what it feels like what we're getting is an information overload, right? So it feels like the only thing that we're seeing is our police is police brutality or negative ideas and sentiments about the police when there are actually, a lot of police officers that are doing really great work, that are really instrumental in supporting the community and protecting and serving in the ways that the motto says. And so I think a component of that is also potentially a fear, right? Of what do I know? I'm really interested to read racially biased policing. I wrote it down so I can add that to my library, but because I think that's a component of it, of police not fully understanding their own biases and how that shows up in their work, in their day-to-day work. And so while it's a bit of a both and, right? Yes, the numbers are going up, but also are we addressing why the numbers are going up and in what communities are we seeing the numbers increase in, because there are also a lot of great research and studies around communities that have had minimal police shootings or minimal negative interactions with police in the community. And so I think more of it is figuring out, okay, what's going to work for our community in the state of Oklahoma, and understanding that what we are going to see in Tulsa or Oklahoma City is not going to look the same as what we'll see in a rural community like Altus, where I'm from, or Okmulgee, or other smaller spaces. And so I'm trying to figure out, how are we strategic in educating folks across the police field, the police force, from top down and bottom up, because I think there's something about what we need to be sharing with leadership that's going to look a little bit different than what we'll share with folks that are, doing routine stops or going to visit homes and things like that.
That, by the way, I agree with all that. So I'm done. I can do that. I think I'll go back a little further. This is not a new discussion. It is a new discussion in the last many years nationally, but within the profession, it's not new. In 1987, when I became police chief, I ended up with a group out of the Kennedy School of Government. It ended up being called the Executive Sessions on Community Policing. Some real smart people from the Kennedy School and some national community activists and a handful of major city chiefs, of which, believe it or not, I was the youngest of that group. And we came together to talk about one thing, and that was race. By then, we knew that policing was on a track to become better trained, better educated, better equipped. We were Vietnam era kind of guys and gals, and so we didn't want to become militarized. And so the community policing movement within the profession emerged over the next 2 or 3 years out of that national work that we did. Now, fast forward to 9/11. We had made some progress over the next 13, 14 years around getting a better sense of the racial disparities and the tensions and the violence involved in the communities in our work. And then 9/11 happened. And the response nationally and to 9/11 set us back. I can tell you, from a historic perspective, we remilitarized the language of war was back into the language of policing. And when that happens, the pressure, particular pressure when implicit bias is built into the formula, takes front again. And now over the next 20 years, and now we are dealing with that And along the way, to answer the second part of the question very quickly, there has been an increase in police use of force, particularly deadly force. We've been tracking it as best we can. It's not perfect tracking, by the way, particularly over the last 20 years or so. And very quickly, some factors. First of all, Americans now have 3 times more guns than they had 20 years ago in their possession. We've come to see violence as a solution, to problems. The police represent culturally, when the culture becomes more violent, more armed, and the systems become more disparate, violence goes up across the board, including police violence. And built into that discussion, there are discussions about justified, unjustified, the racial component, which is serious inside this discussion. And as a person that's, I'm a survivor of police shootings myself, a number of times in my career. So I have some understanding personally and professionally of this dynamic. So putting that together, but I will tell you overall, and for this discussion today, the one constant conversation in this arena has been about race.
Thank you for those insights from both of you. Definitely a lot of different factors to think about. This conversation is not just a simple answer, right? It's a lot of complex factors that are working together. And it's like, okay, so we're going to address this. How can we address it with a really interconnected complex response? Because that's, at the least we can do to, figure out how to move forward from here. So thank you both for those answers. Dr. Lander, I know you specifically work in DEI and you've had these conversations across various panels. So just thinking about, is there a place for DEI in police reform? If so, where is it and what does it look like?
Yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. So, DEI is for everyone, right? So we think about diversity. Diversity is inherent. So if we were to do a poll of just the panelists or the folks that are here today, we're going to get a bunch of different ideas, a bunch of different ideologies, a bunch of different identities, right? And so essentially diversity means difference. We think about equity. How are we meeting people where they are? How are we making sure that folks have the things that they need to be successful? And so for some folks, that means they need food, right? Their food insecure. They need to be eating. For other folks, that's going to look like, I have all the materials I need to be successful, but I really need transportation to get me to and from, right? And so it's going to look different for all of us, right? So equity is figuring out, what does that mean? How does that look, especially for specific communities that have been marginalized, underrepresented, historically looted. And then inclusion is, okay, once we have these components, we know what the folks need, we have all the people here, how are we ensuring that everyone has access? How are we ensuring that everyone is included? And so when we look at that and think about the police force, we have to think about all of them have varying identities. They have varying experiences with police force, with different types of people. They have, they connect with, some of them may have children at home. So they're going to connect with a 4-year-old better than someone who doesn't have children. Some of them have partners. And so looking at all of that, we also need to think about, okay, then how are we discussing topics like DEI? A lot of times we talk about DEI, we simply talk about race, we talk about gender, we talk about sexuality, and we kind of leave out other aspects of diversity. And so that makes people feel like, well, where am I? How am I seen in this conversation if this isn't for me, when in actuality it is? And so, one of those, and I think I said it earlier, but meeting people where they are. One of the issues I think with around 2020 was a lot of folks were like, okay, yes, we have DEI, it's popular, just plug it in. you know, you get a DEI coordinator, you get a DEI director, you know, and they're hiring all these folks. But there wasn't a lot of strategy around what that could look like in the future. How do we persist? How do we maintain this? How do we build an equity framework, a leadership framework, so that it's not just solely on the DEI person to do all the DEI stuff, but they're also able to communicate and educate leaders in their community so that they understand what it looks like to have an equitable workforce. And so I think it was a little bit of moving too fast, too soon. And then also, if you already have a resistant community that's not seeing themselves in this space, then they're like, this isn't for me. This is something that y'all have made up, because it is, the language of DEI is new. But as Mr. Diamond just mentioned, we've been talking about this for a very long time. But the language of DEI is new. And so that's a hurdle in itself. And so, you know, a lot of it is meeting people where they are. So how are you, you know, how do you represent, how do you show up in this space? Everyone shows up in this space, but also what does this look like in the workplace? So it could look like parental leave, right? We're talking about the workforce, the police force, which is predominantly male. Are we giving them paid parental leave? Are we giving, you know, letting these folks go home and take care of their children at the time that, you know, is really needed? Are we providing additional resources and opportunities to them? Are we giving them mental health support? You know, this is really heavy work to work with different people in different communities. And so I think, yes, short answer is yes. DEI is definitely necessary and needed within the police reform and the ways that we interact with our police officers. And I think that can be that can kind of go both ways, right? How are we also supporting the community to work with police? A lot of people have different varying understanding of what the police has done because of whatever community they're from, because of race-based challenges. And so really being able to figure out, okay, how are we supporting our police officers that maybe work on the south side of Oklahoma City? How are we supporting them that work on the northeast side of Oklahoma City? How are we supporting, like, Oklahoma City is huge. And so this isn't going to be necessarily a one size fits all model for all parts of Oklahoma City. There's varying diverse populations that are going to need a different approach. And so I think having a conversation about race, which is hard to do, but race is very pervasive and it impacts a lot of what we do, all of us. And so being able to just start with that conversation of, it's going to be uncomfortable and that's okay, but it does play a role. And I think that there are definite opportunities for us to figure out how do we make sure that the community feels comfortable in interacting with the police, and the police also feel comfortable in interacting with varying parts of our communities.
Thank you for definitely pointing out how diverse and shifting the DEI landscape is. It's not just simply major identity markers, it's so much more than that. Thank you for highlighting that. Before I give Drew a chance to also respond to this question, I just want to introduce our third panelist, JB Williams. Unfortunately, he'd been having some internet connection issues, but we're so happy that you're able to join us, JB. Thank you so much. Sorry, you have the floor. It's okay.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you.
Okay. So just to bring you up to speed, JB, we asked Dr. Lander the question, and also open to all the other panelists, if there is a place for DEI in police reform, and if so, where and what does it look like? So, Drew, I know you came off mute. I didn't know if you had a response to.
No, I was just going to add that in the best police officers, I've been hiring and training and leading police officers for longer than I like to think. And the best I've seen are the officers that take that sense of community, that this equity in terms of service means that they can give the same professional service across any cultural, economic, religious, gender lines, everything. They have to adjust at times to the person in front of them. That's part of the skill. That's part of what we're supposed to be training and having them do. But that adjustment doesn't mean that they change the core value of the delivery of the service. you should be able to walk into any neighborhood, any home, any business, make any car stop with anybody in it. And that person should know that what they're going to get is a fair, honest response to whatever is happening in front of them. That's the police officer's responsibility to be able to do that. When police officers let their own biases get in the way, when they let their own fears sometimes get in the way, that's when it goes sideways. And so the sense of how do you hire, we've done a lot of work and there's so much more to do on how do you identify, particularly young people, to hire, to train, to mold into that holistic person who can do that. I know those men and women and they can do it, but I also know the ones that don't do it, that get it wrong. And I know their supervisors and I know their at times chiefs and sheriffs that absolutely get this conversation wrong. And when they get it wrong, the entire organization is in trouble. So that sense of leadership, and that leadership by the police chief and the sheriff and the political leadership, if they're out of sync with this conversation, and many of them are, then you'll get a disparate response. One last observation. There are 14,400 and some municipal police departments in this country and 3,000 sheriff's departments. So the good news for democracy is all policing in this country is local. There's no actually national uniform police force, although we have some politicians, I won't name them, but one of them is called Trump something, who wanted to have a national police force. We in policing are absolutely against that. But that's the good news. You can't, the bad news is that setting national and consistent standards from, as Dr. Lander said, from different size police departments. By the way, most policing in this country is rural. The average size of police department is 25 officers. There are about 100 major police departments. Tulsa and Oklahoma City are two of them. And so having this discussion and working across the board from a national level is challenging. And that work goes on. Doesn't mean you don't do it, but it is challenging.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that insight. I didn't realize how much of policing was rural, so thank you for that information. So actually, to your point, Drew, I know you touched a little bit on racially biased policing. Just wanting to dive into that a little bit, but also creating the opportunity for other panelists to answer with the question of what reforms have been made and what reforms would you like to see in the police departments? I know for you, Drew, definitely specifically with the Tulsa Police Department, and obviously for our panelists, whatever areas they are living in. So.
Yeah, I'd like to hear what others have to say about that in terms of, because I have a mindset obviously about how reforms work. I will only start with this: is that in all those police agencies, and I know I know the ground pretty well nationally. There's only a handful of police departments of various sizes that get this conversation right, consistently right. There's some inconsistencies and things, but and that's the sad news. The good news is we actually know how to make this better. We know how to do this right. It takes a political will and a community will to make that happen. So so then when you listen to the community, and I mean listen, then the question is for community, what is it that you want to see? Where are the gaps?
I think I have a really great point, right? I think what we've seen is a lot of training, a lot of, attempting to help kind of move people along. But I think one thing that may be lacking is how do we shift some policies, right? What are some things that are going to be long lasting, that are going to, far extend past the current police officers that we're actively seeing? Because I think a deterrent has been the conversation around dismantling the police, right? Understanding the history of the police force in the United States and, why they were created. I understand the debate, but I do think that there's an opportunity, there's space for policing that is really transformational and can really impact people's lives in a positive way. And I think that more of the conversations need to be had with legislation, with folks that are making laws around what are we actually looking for? I think that's a great question. What do you actually want from the police, or what do you not want from the police? And I think to your point, Drew, earlier around, I don't think, well, I'd argue that most of us don't want a militarized police force, right? We don't want that. But in a society where we have an increase in, homeowners or folks, anybody owning guns, it's almost feeling like more of a militarized society. And so it almost seems like there is a reaction to that. And so I think reform can look a lot of different ways, but I definitely think discussing what does it look like for leadership, what does it look like to support our police officers in a way where they understand the communities that they work in, that they live in, that they exist in. And I also like this conversation around community policing and what that could look like for communities that are so diverse, like those in the state of Oklahoma.
Definitely. Wondering from a activist perspective, JB, if you wanted to speak on what police reform would look like, or what you would hope police reform would look like from an activism perspective. JB, you're on mute still, I think.
Sorry. I think I was going to say, I think a lot of it should probably start with someone said a second ago, that's my family behind me, but someone said a second ago, I lost my train of thought. I think it needs to start with like the community, like understanding the needs of the community, like the real needs. Like for instance, I live on the east side, right? I feel like from a police perspective, the idea based on what I've seen, I feel like the idea is that, well, this community needs more police. You know what I'm saying? When that's not the case. If you look up the data from, Oklahoma City, homicides, violence, the east side doesn't have the highest rates, right? But there's this perception that we need more police, and then because of that, we get over policed, right? And so there's not a real sense of what each community needs. I think that's the first thing. Secondly, I think there needs to be a better, like a real relationship build between the police and the community, right? For instance, over here, not long ago, there was an incident on my street, right? And after it was over, the police are sitting out, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning with their lights still on, talking, blocking people's driveways, and I remember being a kid, and if I see, red and blue lights outside your house at 2 o'clock in the morning is traumatizing, you know what I'm saying? And because there isn't any connection or relationship with the people here, they don't have or feel the need to even think about what that does to a family, at 1 o'clock in the morning. But if, they're in a neighborhood that they know, or they, or wherever, they're like, oh, the idea is, well, I know you know, Susie, her kids are sleeping inside. So let me go ahead and cut the lights off. You know what I'm saying? But us over here, there isn't a real relationship. So they don't, the relationship is this is the neighborhood we have to keep in line. So because of that, those things get overlooked. And, you know, also I can't remember who was saying it before, but you know, there is a lot of and especially if you're Black, and especially a Black male, like anytime the police get behind me, I feel like I done did something wrong, even though I haven't. Like that's how I feel. Like I feel like I'm in trouble, right? And that's only because of, you know, whenever growing up, anytime the police got behind us, it was an event. It was, you know what I'm saying? Like everybody in the car, you know, whether it's my mom, my dad, cousins, uncles, aunts, whoever's driving, like, you know, the whole car is interrupted, you know what I'm saying? And so I grew up, you know, feeling like that. And then on top of that, you know, those times when we did get pulled over and we did have those interactions, you know, it does something to you. And so I think because of that, there needs to be some type of connection with the community so that, you know, we don't have to feel like that, you know, and there has to be an understanding that this is what this group of people goes through every time we're present. So how can we make this interaction less traumatic? You know what I'm saying? But that's not why they're here. They're here because, you know, this is the top side of town that we need to keep in line, you know, and we feel like that because that's the way we get treated. I was on a call one time similar to this, and there was, you know, I can't remember if the chief was on, but, you know, there was a lady from Nichols Hills who was, you know, talking about how, you know, she loves the police and loves, you know, and she knew everybody's names and stuff like that, right? Well, you know, I was trying to explain to her the difference in the two. You know, the only time we know that we get the names of police is because we're trying to, you know, report, you know, who has violated us in some way. You know what I'm saying? And so there's that, and then there's also this like I had a conversation. I can't remember if it was with Chief or somebody on the police or maybe even the sheriff, but I've been in conversation with them all. But I was saying how you know, I'm starting a program that will help provide resources and, you know, explain to them how it's important that, you know, this is supported by the city, and you know, um, you know, we need officers who do these things and these certain things. And, you know, the response was, well, yeah, we do that. You know, we have, you know, we have officers in schools. We have, you know, officers that, you know, they go to people's houses and check on them. I go, listen, man, if an officer is showing up to my house, body armor and all that wild stuff, like you're like, that's different. You know what I'm saying? My first interactions in school with police officers and all that stuff, that's not the same. You know what I'm saying? And you see it at community events where they should be showing up and, you know, and interacting with the community, but they show up with the gun on their hip and all, you know, and it's like you're already creating this barrier between you and the people, because there's an element there that makes us feel unsafe, you know. And so there's so many things like that, you know, I'm always trying to explain to, you know, whether it's my homies who are police or in discussions with police, that those are the small things that, you know, we have to start with, because those are the things that affect the community the most. Sorry for talking so long.
Oh, thank you so much for your insight. Your perspective is very important. Just wanting to actually open the floor to other panelists to maybe respond to what JB's saying. Any thoughts on that?
Just one very quickly. Yeah, that's a good synopsis and of the sense of separation at times. My position over the years, and particularly as we began to reinvent community policing in the late 80s, and we it's a body of work, by the way, that is not experimental. We know how to do this. I have the 20 slides and the 10 pages. I can show any police chief or mayor on how to implement community policing and start dealing with those issues that we were just talking about tomorrow. It doesn't cost any more money. And so, but the sense of it is the burden to do this right is on the police. It's on the city. It's on the government to do this right. Communities that get this right have actually gone through the 3 steps of community policing, which we invented. It's about community engagement, it's about problem solving, and the key is organizational transformation. Most police departments, particularly urban police departments, are ill-designed. They're over-specialized. You should have at least 65% of all your officers working in a neighborhood, whether it's downtown neighborhoods, residential, whatever. For example, the Tulsa Police Department is right at 50% of their officers. So half their officers, sworn officers, trained to do this, are doing something other than delivering direct uniform service. In a democracy, in policing in a democracy, the key is at that street level at 2 o'clock in the morning, who's out there driving around in your neighborhood, or at 8 o'clock in the morning, or whenever. And we've gotten away from that. I'm watching police departments advertise, they're all trying, as they try to hire, and they list the 20 things you can do, and not one of them says be a patrol officer. Tulsa Police Department is doing that now. My department, which I love dearly, they're doing that. They'll show all the things you can do, and what they should be advertising is, if you join this agency, your job is to go out there in that uniform and do the service, the direct service, this way to everybody. But they promise you that you only have to do that for a year or two, and then you can be in any special unit, vice narcotics. By the way, I worked in all those units. I helped design them. So I'm not, we need some of that, but it shouldn't be half the organization. The more you need specialized units means the less you're doing in terms of the actual crime prevention. The less crime, the less you need specialized units. So we have the formula kind of backwards. And in the middle of that, again, I'm going to say it again, all the numbers, as we said, will bear this out. The racial disparity in the delivery of that service is right in the middle of that design. So at community policing, when we began to invent the philosophical concept of how to do this practically, we said, okay, then we have to actually change the way we engage, the way we problem solve, and the way, and that is transforming the entire organization. Very few organizations are willing to take on that kind of transformation. Those that have been wildly successful, and that, getting to the core of this, what I always advocate to community is I can hand you the few pages that it takes is to, you want to be an activist, then go to the mayor and the city council and tell them to do this. I've told the last mayors for the last 20 years of the city of Tulsa, I handed them that. I can email it to anybody who wants it. And I said, all you have to do is send this to your police chief and say, do this in the next 6 months and get it done. And they won't do it, which raises another interesting question about where we are in terms of policing.
And You know, I think you bring up a really great point, and the question that I have been wondering too is, what is the reluctance, right? What is the reluctance to not to seeing a model that works, that is community driven, but seems to be, you know, some police chiefs are feeling like that isn't for them.
Yeah, and I can tell you really quickly, this is about power. That part of the discussion is about power. It's about the police are the mechanism of power inside most communities of the use of power. City councilors and mayors generally want to have their handle on the police. Mostly, I'll give you a quick example of a city in back east who we were working with community policing, and we were laying this all out for them. And we had a city councilor who just hated the idea. And I sat down with him and I said, what's the problem? He says, well, Drew, if we do this transformation and then the people in each neighborhood and they have their neighborhood police officers and et cetera, and all this stuff works, what's my job? He said, people come to me now and they say, I need the police to do this, and I make them do that. And I need this. He said, what's my job? And I said, your job is to make sure that that police department and the community has the resources to make that happen. That's your job. Your job is not to police. Your job is to provide the service. You don't go out there and lay down the tar on the street, you know, but they do control where the tar gets laid. And see, they want to do the same thing with the police. So the minute you actually make it real democratic, small d democratic, and you make it community policing, and the community at the neighborhood level and at the district level is involved in the decision-making and the work of their own safety, then politicians lose power from their mind. They don't, but that's their belief.
Definitely a lot of different factors at play, and a lot of different opinions and thoughts on this. So we have a few minutes before we're going into Q&A. So I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Morgan to lead us in Q&A so that we have more discussion and more engagement with the participants on questions that they might have.
All right, y'all. We're going to start with the questions in the chat. If y'all think of anything else, please uplift them, put it in the chat, or you can send me a DM, and if you want like your question to be anonymous. So I'm going to start with this question from Victoria for the whole panel. Do any of the panelists feel that social and racial biases still play an invisible part in judicial sentencing?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there was I don't know how it was really recent, but there was a story about a judge who was sentencing people, and he had someone a black kid who came, no prior history of anything, and then he had an older white man who came with the same offenses, you know, a long rap sheet, but the judge, you know, felt like he didn't want to ruin this man's life. He has so much life to live, and you know, and he reminded him of his nephew or something wild like that, you know. But when it came to the black kid who was a lot younger and who had no priors, you know, he was saying how, you know, there's no hope for you, you're evil, like, you know what I'm saying? He just scolded him, you know, and gave him a way harsher sentence. And so I think, you know, that's definitely just a snapshot of things that happen, you know, all the time, you know. And one thing I've learned just with friends who are, you know, attorneys and public defenders, and is that you know that that world, even the good attorneys, even the great public defenders who are out there and want to do the right thing, there's always that fear of, you know, upsetting a DA, you know, pissing off a judge, you know, and all those things, are factors in, racial bias. There's a judge here in Oklahoma County who, reportedly had a noose in his office. You know what I mean? Like, those things, still exist. And because, there's always this fear of, well, if I piss this judge off and call him out, on his BS, to this DA, and call them out on their BS, then what is that going to do for this client and next client, and so it's dangerous, and it's sad that that's a big reality.
And I'd also add that I don't think that it's invisible. I think it's very visible, a visible part of sentencing, right? Like the data supports that it's a visible part of sentencing. Yeah, Black folks, folks of color are more likely to be sentenced, have a harsher sentencing, and then there's a lack of representation of judges that are of color or from marginalized backgrounds, and so all of that plays a role in to JB's point. If a lawyer decides to speak up, how can that negatively impact their careers, their trajectory, their client's trajectory? It's unfortunately kind of a trickle down. And so, yeah, I'd argue it's actually very visible. It's not an invisible part of sentencing.
One of my homeboys, he was on trial for murder. And the story is really, it was a big story for a while, but he was the guy who operated the grow, and the guy broke into it and he killed him, who was breaking in. The guy who was breaking in was a white guy, and then my friend's obviously a Black guy. But whenever he was going through all this stuff, he told me, he was like, the craziest thing, and he's never been in trouble with the law, nothing like that. He was like, the craziest thing to me, whenever I realized like that, these racial biases do exist. He said, whenever the DA walked in and he just looked at me like he'd seen me before. And I was like, what you mean? He was like, he looked at me like he knew me, like he knew my whole life, like he's seen me in here 100 times. You know what I'm saying? And that's what Black men especially deal with every single time, is that anytime they walk into a courtroom like that, and they're faced with those charges, those prosecutors, those judges are seeing the same. The idea is like, oh, he's just like the last person who was in here, and they feel like they've already seen this person before. And in fact, the DA ended up saying, at one of the hearings, he said, yeah, I've seen this before. It's the drug deal gone bad. You know what I'm saying? And they weren't allowed to bring up that the guy who was breaking in the grow had drugs in the system. They weren't allowed to bring up that in his car, he had all of the merchandise he had stolen from other businesses around that neighborhood. They weren't allowed to bring up the fact that he had broken into the building before that, a day before that, and came back to rob it. You know what I'm saying? So that's what people, have to deal. That's what Black people have to deal with whenever they are in these situations, is that, they're being judged for, things that they have no control over, and they probably weren't even a part of. They're being judged off some image people have in their head of what Black men are and what they're about.
That really got me, JB, of just the existence of, visibly they see you and they think something, and that's the end of the story. This next question is for Drew. What percentage of the population does the police deal with regularly?
Well, departments the size of Tulsa and Oklahoma City will make hundreds of thousands of citizen contacts a year. In metropolitan areas that are, Tulsa 1 million, and Oklahoma City a bit larger. And but the population that they actually do see regularly depends on the way the calls are being managed. It depends on the way they're policing. Departments that aren't transformed in community policing departments haven't redone their beats, haven't made those that beat integrity. They run from call to call to call. And as JB said, they end up concentrating in particularly low income and minority neighborhoods when at times it really isn't necessary. Quickly, in 1970, my first year on the police department. My patrol beat was Archer and Greenwood, was downtown Short North. It was called Short North. The university didn't exist there. There were actually houses and people lived on Greenwood and in Cincinnati, et cetera, in Maine. But the day I got that assignment and I was in the squad meeting, and the sergeant came up to me and said, Diamond, you're going to be in the war zone. Listen, I'm an Army veteran. I've been in war zones. You know, North Tulsa was not then and is not now a war zone. But they said that all the time. It's still said. We saw some of that even as recently as when Terrence Crutcher was killed. For full disclosure, I'm a founding member of the Crutcher Foundation, so I just let you know. But I know the family. I know what happened there, but that was the same thing. The defense was policing in North Tulsa, and policing, particularly with Black men, is scary. You know, it's a different kind of thing. That's nonsense. You know, that is just not true. You know, but once you bake that into a culture and you bake it into a policing mythology, and if you train people in an academy about how to do this right, and the minute they get out in that patrol car with their training officer for 6 months, and they tell them, forget all that, this is the way it really is here, you know, and that's back to disconnects. That's one of the major cultural and racial disconnects.
Flipping to an anecdote to this issue, here's a question about community events from police. Have we seen those help build positive relationships? So police hosting a community event in a neighborhood or engaging with the community.
I want to just jump in because it's a point for me. I am not against ropes courses, community events, picnic. I did thousands of them. I thought that's fine. But when you come to rely on a community policing officer or a handful I never had a community policing squad, because it's in the Tulsa Police Department with 800 officers, all 800 of them have to be able to do that correctly. So the two officers that go out to the school and go out to the picnic and go out to do that are not the same two officers who are going to show up at your house at 9 o'clock at night. The officer that you need to know is the officer that's going to, I ask, and I still do this, I still train officers, I train communities. I ask everybody, the first question is, name the beat officer in your beat. Every beat in the city of Tulsa and the city of Oklahoma City has a squad of officers assigned. And they're the same officers for at least 6 months, and sometimes for longer, should be longer, by the way. But they have officers assigned. Most people, unless they had to call them, can't name that officer. And then I ask the officers in the room, name 5 people on your beat other than somebody you've arrested. They're hard pressed to do that. Because we are policing from a standpoint of reactionary policing, which is the opposite of community policing. So we drive around on the expressways, drive around outside the neighborhoods, wait for the bad thing to happen, and quite frankly, for the most part, do that well, rush in, those police cars with their lights flashing in the middle of the night. We do that, we take care of it, and then what do? We leave, never to be seen again, until you call us. That's part of the design flaw in urban policing today.
Just wanting to jump in and ask our final question to the panelists, and in just a few words, what do you want the audience to take away from today? And just open to all panelists.
I would say, I mean, clearly there's a lot of work to do, but I think that it is a joint effort, right? So it's the community saying, hey, I should know, right? I have no idea who the police officers are. I just learned something, right? And remembering that I have agency as a community member, as a mother, as a wife, and so as a leader in this community, I have agency, and I have, as a neighbor, literally OSU OKC is right next to the to the police department. And so remembering that you have agency as an individual, that your community has agency, and that it should be a shared responsibility for us to hold our police officers in our police officer leadership accountable for how we are being policed or not being policed in some communities.
I second that, and I would tell you, the other thing I want people to know is we actually do know how to do this better. We know the right way to deliver police service in a democracy. And the work that when people, if you're engaged in this and you're engaged in community work, is it's easy to get that work together. It's a political solution. At the end of the day, this is a political solution, and the people that own that are the mayors and city councilors in communities. That's where the pressure needs to be to make policing come to its full potential.
Yeah, I agree with both. I think that I hope people just take away that, like she said, there's work for us to do on both sides, and all the community can do is our side, and part of that is, like he said, we have to really start to show up more and show up more to city council meetings, and pay attention to who our city council people are and the mayor, and be active in all those places, because if we are, then those are some of the ways we can start to see some of these things that we're always talking about change. So
thank you all so much, and thank you to our audience for participating. I know we didn't have a long time, but thank you all for leaning in and joining these discussions. Just a couple of housekeeping things from the OCCJ side. Our Inclusive Leadership Institute application for the fall is open. If you would like to apply, we will drop a link in the chat for you. Also, if you would like to nominate someone for the Inclusive Leadership Institute, we'll also drop a nomination link in there. If you would like to keep up with OCCJ in regards to the panels we're hosting and the months we're hosting and the programs we're running, including programs talking about racial issues both in Oklahoma City and in Tulsa, you can follow us through our newsletter and get updates on that. And also our youth summer program is coming up in July, called our Anytown program. If you know any youth between that are middle school and high schoolers that would be interested in this program, please feel free to recommend them. And I just want to say one more time to our panelists, thank you for your insight. Thank you for your perspective. And I think when I think about this panel and I think about all the amazing work each of you do in the different fields you're in, this is what for me inclusion looks like. It's bringing different people with different perspectives from different walks of life into the same conversation and making room regardless of, how to have those conversations, not in one structured way. So thank you all for leaning into that space, and thank you, our audience, for leaning into that space as well. I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.